right? Good to see you all. Thanks for coming out. And thank you for the opportunity. So, my day-to-day, I work in the Environment Agency, and you'll often find me at Kill the Salmon Centre. I promise I had a shower on the way home, so I don't smell of fish. So let's get straight to it, looking at the freshwater pearl mussel, the life cycle. The life cycle is something truly remarkable for this species. So in the summer months, June, July, we find the adult mussels will breed. So the male will release the sperm, the female will take that in and fertilize that. A couple of weeks later, these small larvae called Glaucidia will be released. They're about 63 micron, so tiny. And they'll be released in their millions, and they've got maybe a couple of hours to a couple of days to successfully encyst to a host fish. For this species, the host fish would be trout or salmon. So if we're in the east of the country, east of Ireland or east of England, we would find that it's trout that they encyst to. If we're in the west, it will be salmon. And if you go across the European range, you find different rivers have one particular host over another. And then in some Russian rivers, they select both. We find that the Glaucidia, once they clamp down, they're like a wee Pac-Man, you know, the old thing that would move around like this. So they clamp down on the fish, and the gills have an immune response that forms a cyst over the Glaucidia larvae, and that cyst will be there for several to 9 months, sometimes quicker if the water is warmer. And when the larva has developed to the stage that it's ready, it'll be around 350 to 450 microns, so not even half a millimeter, and it'll pop through the gill and drop out, negatively buoyant, into the sediment, where it will then grow very, very slowly and through lots of vulnerable life stages. So at first it feeds with its foot, so we call that pedal feeding, and then when it reaches around 2 millimeters, it will start feeding with its gills, and it will do that for the rest of its life. Every time a visitor comes to Kill the Salmon Centre, they say, why bother working with freshwater pearl mussels? Mussels have an incredible place in the river. So they are in that section between the groundwater and the open river water. They turn over the gravels. They interact with other species in that region. They're a filter feeder. So they take in material from the water and they process that and use that for their own growth. Their body, their shell, has a whole uses for other species, including tools and jewellery for people, or food for species like otters. They're a good indicator species, so if a vulnerable species like the freshwater pearl mussel is dying out, then we can say, what is wrong with this river? What has changed? By protecting the species, we might protect a whole host of other species under its care. So if we're meeting the water requirements for this species, it'll be drawn out. So the distribution, they have a whole Arctic distribution, so they're also in North America. This is the European range. You can see in orange where they're found. They're in upland, hillland regions, fast-flowing rivers, often at the top or the bottom of a riffle. It's well oxygenated, and it's really low in nutrient and high in oxygen. This is actually a newspaper map here on the left, but it's quite good. It just shows the species that we have in England. Sorry, the distribution of the species within England. And you can see in red are the largest populations. And so one of the largest populations within England is here in this region. So in colder climes, so in Norway, Sweden, the freshwater pearl mussel might live 150, 200 years in age. In Portugal, Spain, where it's much warmer and the metabolism is higher, the species might live only to 30 or 40 years of age, if it even survives the drought problems that they're having. And then in the UK, we find that they are living somewhere between 100 and 150 years if they survive all of the human changes to river systems. This is an intentionally blurry map, but it's this is within our region where you'll find the freshwater pearl mussel. So you've got Hexham would be at the bottom point, and you've got the North Tyne and the River Reed coming out beside that. So if you know Otterburn or Bellingham or Wark, that's the sort of place you would find the freshwater pearl mussel in this area. The biggest beds of mussels are found nearer to Hexham, at the bottom of the river system, and where we'd expect to find healthy beds in the middle and the top regions of the river, they've died out. We're not finding them there. And we're finding surveys 10, 20 years ago had more mussels at these sites than we're seeing now. So an endangered species, non-recruiting, we're not finding any juveniles at all under the age of 20, 30, 40 even in most places, and there's a declining adult population. So that's the problem, that's the fear, the worry, and so that's why we're working in the Environment Agency to turn this around. So I'm based at Kielder, at the top of the reservoir there, and we have a hatchery where we're captive breeding the species. This is a really great diagram. I want to look just for a moment about issues that the pearl mussel faces. So this is a West Country Rivers Trust production, but it's great. Everything on the left is really poor land management, and everything on the right is a little bit better. So forestry management can cause high sediment runoff, changing the acidity to the river. The way that fields are ploughed and tilled, even historically within this region, often leads to sediment running straight down into the river. Excessive use of fertilizers or poor grassland management, poor farm yard management, poor silage management, overgrazing, really lacking riparian zone. All of these are causes of decline for the freshwater pearl mussel. They will have a knock-on effect, not just for the mussel, but for a whole range of species. Specifically to the reed, we know that the suspended sediment from the area is just too high. It's not right for the juveniles. So a salmon red, where you would get the eggs, and the juvenile mussels would be in that same area in the fine gravels. And if you get a big flush of sediment from a dredged field or the removal of a whole section of forest, that just slumps into the river, and it just smothers the habitat where those juveniles are. So they're not making it through that vulnerable first 5 to 10 years. Historically, pearl fishing, it's thought that one of the background reasons for the Romans coming to the UK was also as a pearl mussel trade. There was a big industry of taking that into their jewellery market. So pearl fishing still continues, and the law tries to challenge and tackle that. Stranding, so with water level changes, drought, maybe if the reservoirs weren't managed properly, there might be mussels left stranded. Reservoirs can lead to armouring if you've got a channelized canal flow, and that means the riverbed gets hard and it's not permeable. It's not easy for those juveniles to dig in. Overgrazing is an issue in the region, and usually the riparian zone isn't well fenced or forested, so that just slumps into the river. One of the questions we were thinking about is the Water Framework Directive target of aiming for good enough. So this species requires a high water quality. So it might be that we aimed for a good water quality in a region, and then we stopped there, and we said this is okay, this is pretty good, but this species requires the best rivers, the cleanest, the most natural. So that's a challenge that he's thought about when conserving a species: is the habitat right? This is overly wordy. It's just the law. It's that you shouldn't kill, injure, or take a mussel or possess them. This is to tackle poor building construction or illegal fishing of the species. So if you're going to work with mussels, you need a natural England license for translocating, so moving them for breeding or introduction, for surveying, for in-river works. If you want to build a jetty to go fishing, you need a lot of licenses, but you definitely need a pearl mussel one in this region. And even filming, if you're wandering about and standing all over the bed, you need to talk to Natural England about going in and doing that. The freshwater pearl mussel is one of the, I think it's the first species to have a SEN standard. So that's like a European system of doing a job. And so surveying mussels has a SEN standard for freshwater pearl mussels. So that's worth looking at. Just some pictures to enjoy. This is at the hatchery. So we've got the juvenile, the encysted mussels on the gills of a trout on the left. That's what it looks like when you open the gill rakes. And we've got this net. This is how we catch the mussels when they come off the fish. It's a long job because you have to separate fish waste and mussels, and they are less than 0.5 millimetre in size. So it's a long job. And then this is them feeding up here. So you can see their little foot is out scraping the bed. And we keep them in boxes like this for the first year or so in an incubator at a warmer temperature. So we've got a picture of the incubator at the bottom left. This is the setup we use to encysted the fish and then collect the mussels. We've got these flow-through trays on the right. So when they get a bit bigger and they're filter feed, we have them on a constant flow from the river so that they can just live naturally. But we keep that gravel clean every day so they make it through that first 5 years. We're trying to gather some information on sediment in the catchment. So we've got some sediment traps out there that look a bit like a giant pencil. We've got this bathyscope, so it's like the reverse of a submarine. So I can look in the river and have a look at the mussels. And then we would introduce mussels to the river in these silos. So when the mussel is still in this silo, it's not technically released to the wild. So I can monitor that, its size, its survival. But as soon as I release that back into the river, it's then back off, it's back into license. So I would then need a license to survey it or touch it or look at it. So that's kind of an interesting thing about releasing a species half back into captivity, but still trying to keep a monitoring on it. Yeah, these are just some random questions I threw together at the end, things that I think about in my job. So when is captive breeding an acceptable method? Well, literature would suggest that when there's no other option. So when it's a non-recruiting population and the natural environment isn't really up to scratch and you need to bring some into captivity, an ARC site to work with. The gene pool question is one ongoing. It's particularly for fish breeding. Do you have enough of your parent broodstock in order that you keep a wide gene pool? How many animals to produce where and when? This is one I'm still working on, and it's where Natural England and the Environment Agencies and other groups work together, and they say, well, in some Swedish rivers you would have mussels from bed to bed and 1 metre deep, but in reality that's probably not what it would look like here in the UK. So what should it look like, and how do we map that and estimate that using mapping software and what we know about the species? Yeah, it's important to have monitoring. A lot of captive breeding methods, particularly early on, they didn't always have a good measure of success. And I guess each species you work with, you need to think about how to map out the long-term success of that, not just what you've released in the first few months, but 20 years down the line, has it worked, or do you need to come back to it? Yeah, what other actions are needed in tandem? So we work with the Rivers Trust and other groups within the region. There was revitalising Reedsdale for a long time, improving the river, working with communities, farmers, trying to improve the land so that the river is better, and then we can put the species back. Financial support. Yeah, if you're ever working with a captive breeding species, often there's funding for 1 year, 3 years, if you're lucky 5. So if you can get 10 or 20 years, a species like the freshwater pearl mussel probably needs about 50 years of work, because you're talking about real land use change and legacy nutrients flushing out and so forth. So, yeah, money is important in conservation. And could a single species focus cause more harm than good? There was a case where a riverbank was sealed up and removed because they thought the sediment was going to get in and destroy the mussels. But the dragonflies had nowhere to lay their eggs. So our flip side of that is everyone's excited about beaver reintroductions, and that's a good point, but they form dams that build up a high load of sediment, and occasionally that releases and flushes, and if that covers a load of salmon reds and freshwater pearl mussel beds, not so good. So yeah, just some food for thought. And that's it. Thank you for listening.